You've found Nightfall Murmurs. When day fades into silence, the world begins to whisper. Some stories come as murmurs, some as warnings, but they all come at night. Don't be afraid to listen, but never listen alone. This little foray was meant to be uncomplicated. A brief communion with nature, nothing more. The woods themselves were hardly vast, a modest tangle clinging precariously to the fringes of ordered life. On nights when the wind sighed just so, the distant hum of traffic was a faint metallic reminder of the world nearby. Civilization frayed at these edges, a neatly stitched hem bordering wilder fabric, and that proximity was precisely the allure. Wilderness by suggestion, escape within easy reach. The initial day unfolded without incident. My small nylon dome rose near a gap in the canopy, a place promising starlight. Quietude settled, thick and comforting. Over flickering embers, I charred sausages, letting the dusk deepen into true night. The familiar orchestra began, churring insects, the distant, questioning hoot of an owl, the commonplace sounds of the woods after dark. Later, cocooned in my sleeping bag, zipped against the cooling air, I surrendered to slumber. It began with a sound that ripped the night's fabric. Not screaming, precisely, or not anything forged in human lungs, I desperately reasoned. Too piercing, too serrated at the edges. It sliced through the stillness with such violence that I was bolt upright, heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, the pulse echoing in my ears before conscious thought caught up. I remained utterly still, straining against the sudden silence. A vixen, perhaps? Some nocturnal bird in distress? The thought felt thin, unconvincing, but the cry didn't repeat. Time stretched, measured only by my shallow breaths and the tight clench of my fists on the sleeping bag. Eventually, a fragile logic asserted itself. Woods are noisy places, full of strange utterances. I eased back down, coaxing my rigid muscles toward relaxation. Then came the distinct pressure of weight on fallen leaves, footfalls, unhurried, deliberate, circling just beyond the thin walls of my shelter. My breath hitched, every nerve ending flared. A deer, surely, or perhaps a raccoon, bold and curious. Nothing more sinister than that. Yet the sound persisted. A slow, rhythmic crunch, crunch, crunch. It navigated the undergrowth with undeniable heaviness. Too heavy. My hand, betraying me with its tremor, sought the flashlight. Twice my thumb slid off the switch before a pale cone of light sprang forth. I eased the tent zipper down a fraction, just enough to thrust my arm and the light into the oppressive dark. Dancing shadows leaped between trunks, but revealed nothing solid. And then, silence again. The footsteps had ceased. This new quiet felt heavier, more menacing than the sound itself. "Is someone there?" The voice was mine, yet it emerged frail, a mere whisper that cracked embarrassingly. Clearing my throat, I projected more volume, trying for assertion. "Hey, cut it out! Who's there?" The tremor in my voice mocked the attempt at bravado. Only the sighing breeze through the high branches answered. "Calm down," I commanded myself. Imagination runs wild out here. Animals, tricks of the dark. I'd camped often enough to know the mind's propensity for conjuring phantoms from shadow and sound. Retracting my arm, I secured the zipper, the small metallic rasp echoing loudly. I sat rigid, the flashlight clutched like a talisman, waiting for something indeterminate and dreadful. When sound returned, it wasn't walking. It was a frantic, pounding flight through the brush. Galvanized, I flicked the flashlight back on, wrenching the zipper open wider. The beam sliced into the darkness, snagging on movement. A shape, hurtling between the trees, impossibly large, upright yet profoundly not human. Its locomotion, its sheer velocity, it defied natural law. I stared, paralyzed, my mind scrambling to categorize the impossible image, but it vanished as swiftly as it appeared, swallowed by the gloom. The woods fell silent once more, save for the ragged, audible gasps tearing from my own lungs. Panic, I knew, was useless. Two paths lay before me: hunker down in the flimsy tent until dawn, or make a break for it. Remaining felt like an invitation. Whatever that presence was, it didn't feel benign or accidental. Boots, jacket, fumbled on with clumsy haste. Flashlight jammed into a pocket. Phone, keys, the small utility knife I always carried. A pathetic arsenal, yet infinitely better than bare hands. The objective crystallized. Reach the car, parked perhaps half a mile distant, just beyond the trailhead. Safety lay within its metal shell. I clung to that belief. The trail underfoot was a treacherous ribbon of roots and loose earth, familiar yet transformed by fear. I kept the flashlight beam aimed low, scanning the ground immediately ahead. Every few yards I'd pause, listening intently. The forest felt fundamentally altered, unnervingly still, as if every living thing held its breath alongside me. No crickets, no owls, only silence. And then, the shriek again. Closer now, disturbingly close, seeming to originate from the direction of my escape route, near the car. A cold knot tightened in my gut. My grip on the knife became bone white. I pushed forward, faster, abandoning caution. Noise no longer mattered, only distance. The footsteps returned, not pursuing from behind, but paralleling my course, deeper within the trees. Unseen, yet undeniably present, keeping pace. A measured, stalking gait replaced the earlier frantic run. I spun, casting the light wildly into the tangled undergrowth. For a fleeting instant, I caught it. Twin points of light reflecting my beam, low, like an animal's. Then darkness swallowed them, and the accompanying footsteps fell silent once more. "Leave me alone!" The shout felt inadequate, swallowed by the vastness, echoing back emptily. Silence remained the only reply. Turning back to the path, I broke into a desperate run. Roots snagged at my ankles. Stones threatened to send me sprawling. Twice I stumbled, catching myself with jarring force. My lungs burned. My legs felt leaden, protesting the abuse. But the car, I could almost see it. A faint metallic sheen filtering through the final stand of trees. Then I heard it, unmistakably behind me, gaining ground. I refused to look back. A primal certainty told me that looking back would break me. I ran, fueled by sheer terror, every muscle fiber screaming. The flashlight beam danced erratically, illuminating chaotic fragments of bark and earth. I burst from the tree line onto the gravel of the small lot like something ejected. The car sat there, a solid dark shape against the lesser dark of the night sky. Keys scraped against each other as I fumbled them from my pocket. The remote chirped, lights flashed, a beacon. Sprinting the final yards, I wrenched the driver's door open, practically falling inside, slamming it shut and mashing the lock button. Chest heaving, I sat gripping the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the impenetrable wall of trees. Stillness reigned, and then a deafening impact slammed into the passenger side. A scream tore from my throat, involuntary, guttural. The car rocked violently with a second blow, heavy enough to make me fear it tipping. Through the side window, I saw it. A towering silhouette pressed close, immense, covered in something dark, coarse, like matted fur or rough bark. The details swam, refused to coalesce into anything comprehensible. My mind recoiled. Key jammed into the ignition, twisted hard. The engine roared, a defiant sound in the charged silence. Foot stomped on the accelerator. Tires screamed on the loose gravel as the car leaped forward, fishtailing onto the narrow access road. Speed limits, potholes, irrelevant. Distance was the only imperative. The rearview mirror reflected only receding darkness. The presence wasn't visibly pursuing, or perhaps it was, cloaked in the night it commanded. I didn't slow until my own driveway lights illuminated the familiar, mundane lines of my house. I remained in the idling car for a long time, staring at the stranger reflected in the mirror. Pale face, wide, haunted eyes, hair plastered to my forehead with cold sweat. My hands still trembled uncontrollably. Eventually, mechanically, I exited the car, moving into the house, securing every lock, drawing every blind. Sleep was an impossibility. Closing my eyes only conjured the shape between the trees, the reflected eyes, that soul-shredding cry. I swore I would never return. No more woods, no more solitary communion with nature. Yet a chilling certainty lingered beneath the terror. This wasn't over. That thing, whatever it was, hadn't merely been an animal, hadn't just been passing through. It had watched, it had followed, and it was still out there. Outside, the wind tore through the pines, a desolate cry that vibrated the very glass of my cabin windows. I gathered the quilt closer, its warmth a meager defense against the disquiet that had coiled in my gut since twilight bled from the sky. This retreat was meant for solace, a haven to untangle my thoughts and wrestle my manuscript into submission. Yet, as the hours deepened, solitude curdled into something isolating, menacing. Chosen for its profound seclusion, nestled leagues from any sign of civilization, the cabin now felt less like refuge and more like a snare. The hearthfire spat and hissed, casted frantic shadows, but failed to penetrate the marrow-deep coldness that had taken root within me. It began subtly, the scrape of a skeletal branch overhead, the settling groan of aged timber. Expected noises, I reasoned, the vernacular of an old house in deep woods. But the night breathed on, and the sounds shifted, acquiring an unnerving cadence, a hint of intention. I was ensconced on the worn sofa, laptop aglow, attempting immersion in the world I was crafting when it came. The distinct snap-crackle of dry leaves underfoot, sketching a slow perimeter around the cabin walls. My fingers went rigid above the keys, air hitched in my throat. "Just dear," I breathed, the whisper dissolving unanswered in the room. But deer don't pace with such methodical deliberation. Setting the laptop aside with trembling hands, I stole toward the window, the frantic thrumming in my chest loud enough surely to betray me. Easing back the heavy curtain by a mere inch, I scanned the impenetrable dark, nothing but the void where the forest slept. Then, a flicker at the edge of vision. A shape, denser than the night itself, slipped between two ancient oaks. I blinked, certain fatigue was conjuring phantoms, but looking again confirmed it. Another presence, and another still. A glacial dread infused my veins. Figures stood among the trees, multiple silhouettes, motionless, their collective focus aimed squarely at my small, illuminated box. Watching, waiting. The curtain fell back, my thoughts scattered like startled birds. Who? Why? My hand darted for my phone, a useless reflex. The screen displayed only no service. The landline, a dusty artifact perched in the kitchen. On legs turned to water, I navigated the space, staying low, avoiding the accusing black rectangles of the windows. The rotary phone felt cold, alien. Lifting the receiver, I strained for the comforting hum of a connection. Only silence answered, profound and final. The line was severed. A strangled sound, half sob, half gasp, escaped me. Cornered, utterly alone, communication lines cut. The cozy cabin transformed into a cage, and a primal awareness screamed that I was the quarry. A solid thump against the back wall sent me recoiling. Nearer now. Muffled voices followed, indistinct murmurs carried on the wind. My gaze swept the kitchen, desperate for a weapon. It landed on the knife block. The chef's knife felt unnaturally heavy, its polished surface reflecting my own wide eyes. Violence was a stranger to me, the very thought abhorrent, yet faced with this unknown, encroaching threat, a grim certainty hardened within me. Survival at any cost. Another impact, this one at the front door. They were here. I flattened myself against the cool plaster beside the kitchen doorway, the knife held tight, its point aimed at nothing. My breath soared raggedly. The doorknob turned, once, twice, stopped, a fragile tendril of hope unfurled, only to be instantly shredded by the sharp, splintering shatter of glass. A window breached. Panic surged, a suffocating wave. Staying put meant being trapped. Movement was imperative. Escape. The back door, if I could reach it. Perhaps the woods would swallow me, offer concealment in their depths. I slid along the wall, each footfall a potential betrayal, on the groaning floorboards. Their whispers were inside now, echoing unnervingly in the confined space. Just as my fingers brushed the cold metal of the back doorknob, a plank beneath me shrieked in protest. The whispering ceased. They knew. No time left for stealth. I wrenched the door open and burst into the freezing night air, a shock like a physical blow. Blindly, I ran. Branches lashed my face. Unseen roots clawed at my ankles. Behind me, shouts erupted, the heavy crashing of pursuit through the undergrowth. They were coming. The forest, benign by daylight, was now a treacherous maze of grasping shadows and hidden pitfalls. I pushed on until my lungs burned, each inhalation searing my chest, but the sounds of pursuit relentlessly gained ground. A backward glance, a mistake. Dim figures resolved themselves from the darkness, closing the distance. My foot snagged, the world tilted violently. I hit the earth hard, tasting dirt and decay. The knife spun from my grasp, swallowed by the leaf litter. I scrambled, desperate, but hands seized me, rough and strong, spinning me to face my captors. I struck out wildly, connecting with yielding flesh. A sharp grunt, then more hands pinned my arms, immobilizing me. "Hold!" commanded a deep, resonant voice. "We mean you no harm, Ilara." My struggles ceased, less from obedience than sheer astonishment. My name? What do you want? The words were a ragged gasp. A pause, thick with unspoken things. Then, the scrape of a match, and a tiny flame bloomed, illuminating the face of the man holding me. Ordinary features, etched with weariness and concern, swam in the flickering light. "We need your help," Silas said, his gaze intense. "There is something coming, a blight upon this place, and the threads of fate have led us to believe you are pivotal." I stared, adrift in disbelief. "Help? I don't. Who are you?" Silas sighed, pinching out the match flame. Darkness rushed back in, his voice seeming to emanate from the trees themselves. "We are the keepers of this wild wood. For generations my kin have stood vigil, shielding it from encroaching shadows, both mundane and arcane." Another voice, feminine and clear, joined his. "A corruption spreads, Ilara. We have foreseen it. A creeping malevolence that threatens far more than just these trees. It aims for the heart of things. And you think I can stop it?" Incredulity roughened my voice. "I'm a novelist. I came here for quiet, to finish a book, not fight some cosmic evil." A low chuckle sounded from my left. "Destiny rarely consults our plans. That book you labor over, its significance runs deeper than you can imagine." My head swam. This had to be delusion, an elaborate hoax born of isolation and frayed nerves. "I don't believe this," I stated. Yet beneath the denial, a strange resonance hummed, a flicker of something ancient and half-remembered. Silas spoke again, his tone gentler now. "We understand this is sudden, shocking. Forgive our methods. Terror was not our intent, but certainty was essential before revealing ourselves. Will you grant us the courtesy of explanation? Allow us to lay bare the truth?" I stood frozen, encircled by these enigmatic strangers in the vast, breathing darkness, every instinct shrieking for flight. Yet, intertwined with the fear, a powerful current of curiosity surged, a nascent sense of purpose. What if it wasn't madness? What if this impossible story held a core of truth? After a silence stretched taut, I gave a single decisive nod. "All right," I heard myself say, my voice surprisingly firm. "I'll listen. But if this involves chanting or ceremonial robes, I'm out." A murmur of relieved laughter passed through the group, easing the suffocating tension. As they produced torches, their beams cutting cones of light through the gloom, guiding us back toward the cabin, the conviction settled upon me. My life had just irrevocably shifted on its axis. The novel felt suddenly small, a mere prologue to the narrative unfolding around me. Crossing the threshold back into the warm, lamplit interior, I drew a deep breath, bracing myself for the revelations to come. Little did I grasp that this night marked only the beginning. the first step into a reality far stranger and more perilous than any fiction I could conceive. The shadows I had feared moments ago now seemed pregnant with ancient secrets and veiled truths. As I settled onto the sofa, Silas beginning to speak, I sensed that the most terrifying encounters are sometimes the catalysts for profound transformation. And there, surrounded by the forest's unlikely guardians, I felt strangely ready to be transformed. The precise instant Elias knew something had deviated, warped from the expected, remains etched in his memory. He'd just finished positioning the luminary device in his nascent backyard cinema, a converted outbuilding. Some called them casitas. He just thought of it as his refuge. Standing before the blank canvas of the screen, a thrill fizzing in his veins for this inaugural trial, the neighborhood had settled into its post-sunset hush. The projector's power button yielded smoothly under his thumb. He anticipated the clean, sterile hum of modern electronics awakening. What came instead was a brittle crackle, a phantom hiss like ancient celluloid catching in a gate, ephemeral but sharp enough to send a jolt through his pulse. He dismissed it, a cognitive shrug, attributing it to the machine's nascent groans. Yet a digital heart shouldn't beat with the ghost of film, a dissonance he noted but failed, then to truly question. Permit an explanation for this apparatus's presence. Roughly 2 moons prior, Elias had conceived the notion of transmuting the humble structure at his property's edge into a sanctuary for moving pictures. A devotee of cinema, he craved an ambience steeped in nostalgia, leading him to acquire a digital projector meticulously crafted to mimic the aesthetics of a bygone era. Online accolades praised its marriage of vintage charm and contemporary performance. The price felt congruent with its promise. When the parcel arrived, cradling the machine felt like unearthing a peculiar treasure, something existing slightly out of time. That premiere evening, cables snaked like umbilicals from his laptop to the device. A makeshift altar held snacks. The overhead bulb yielded to shadow. He initiated a brief film sequence. The projector flared to life, bathing the screen in expected light. For several heartbeats, normalcy reigned. Then the image stuttered, not the pixelated hiccup of a digital file, but an organic flicker reminiscent of archival newsreels spooling through time. This phantom tremor played across a high-definition stream originating from his laptop. It possessed no logical right to manifest. Elias halted the playback, meticulously tracing the HDMI's path, verifying the power connection. All seemed inviolate. He resumed the clip. It flowed unimpeded for perhaps a minute before the spectral flicker returned, accompanied this time by a faint, dry crackling, the sound of static whispery from a forgotten wireless set. Stop the video. Silence. Restart, and within another minute, the twin anomalies resurfaced. He rose, approached the screen, scrutinizing the lens for imperfections. It was then he perceived a subtle shift in the projector's operational hum, its low thrum modulating to a marginally higher, strained whine. Simultaneously, a distinct coolness brushed his skin, an inexplicable draft within the sealed space. He pivoted, instinctively seeking an unlatched window, but found it resolutely shut. The air against his arms wasn't frigid, yet it raised goose flesh, a disquieting caress. Annoyance warred with bewilderment. He found himself repeatedly testing the window latch, confirming its integrity. It always held fast. Over the ensuing days, Elias attempted to normalize the aberration. He projected snippets, experimented with seating arrangements, rearranged the screen. The flicker and its static accompaniment surfaced erratically, brief intrusions that peppered but didn't wholly derail the experience, yet persistently sowed seeds of doubt about the machine's integrity. A firmware gremlin, perhaps? Then, approximately a week into its use, during a nocturnal viewing of a monochrome classic, the disquiet deepened. 20 minutes flowed seamlessly before the screen abruptly winked into blackness. Sound from the speakers evaporated. Into the sudden void bled a sound utterly anachronistic. The distinct whir and clatter of film reels rapidly unwinding, as if an unseen projectionist operated antiquated machinery directly behind him. Elias spun around, heart leaping. Emptiness greeted him, but the air itself felt transformed, suddenly glacial, a palpable plunge in temperature that felt utterly unnatural in the enclosed space. He stood frozen, breath held captive. Then, as swiftly as it had vanished, the digital light returned. The film resumed from its point of interruption, though the image now bore a subtle, persistent tremor. Elias remained rooted, every nerve taut, anticipating something more. After perhaps 15 seconds, the stutter smoothed, the film proceeding as if nothing had occurred. He sank back into his chair, yet a peculiar tension coiled within his chest. His body involuntarily braced for an unseen impact. Henceforth, every session within that small building felt charged, uncomfortable. The static would erupt without preamble, sometimes interwoven with a sibilant whisper, low and resonant, hovering just at the threshold of audibility. Attempting to focus on it invariably caused it to cease. Whenever he paused the stream or moved away from the projector's beam, gooseflesh would pebble his arms, accompanied by that sudden, phantom breeze whose origin remained stubbornly untraceable. He began inspecting the walls for hidden fissures, the floorboards for gaps. Nothing accounted for the abrupt thermal shifts. The main house's climate control didn't extend here. No vents could possibly orchestrate such rapid atmospheric changes. He went so far as to meticulously replace the window seals, seeking some imperceptible breach. It yielded no change. Each nocturnal test inevitably resurrected the flicker, the static, and that inexplicable chill. One evening, Elias resolved to approach the phenomenon with clinical detachment, to document its behavior rigorously. He activated a simple test pattern, a stark white rectangle, and settled with a notepad, pen poised. For 10 minutes, the apparatus performed flawlessly. Then the screen wavered. The familiar faint crackle returned. He noted it. Seconds later, the cold descended, tangible enough to stir the pages of his notepad, a miniature, localized gust. He rose, methodically circumnavigated the interior, verifying the sealed door, the locked window. Secure. The flicker persisted. The static swelled momentarily, then subsided. Returning to his seat, he willed himself calm. As he sat, a low murmuring seemed to press against his left ear, a deep, indistinct rumble, like speech muffled or formed incompletely, uttered inches away. His scalp prickled, his heart hammered against his ribs. The sound vanished in less than 2 beats. He scanned the empty room. He was unequivocally alone, yet the air felt thick, occupied. A surge of anger at the sheer absurdity washed over him. A rational man, spooked by phantom whispers. He cut the power to the projector, rose, and exited, consciously reining in his galloping imagination. The following morning, bright sunlight flooding the space, he repeated the test pattern. Utter normalcy. No flicker, no static whispers, no invasive cold. The projector behaved impeccably. He even extinguished the overhead light, attempting to mimic the nocturnal gloom. Still, nothing untoward occurred. Perfection. He started grasping at straws, peculiar atmospheric effects related to nighttime temperature drops, electronic interference from some unknown source. His locale was tranquil, electronically sparse. The singular distinction, he reasoned, was the profound silence of night, perhaps rendering his senses hyper-attuned to stray sounds. But that flimsy hypothesis crumbled against the undeniable reality of the cold. The subsequent night, Elias introduced a small electric heater, aiming to impose thermal stability. He switched on the projector, initiated a film, the heater humming reassuringly. For 15 minutes, equilibrium held. The room stayed temperate. The heater's fan provided a steady counterpoint to the projector's low drone. The image remained resolute. Then, abruptly, the static erupted, the image flickered, and the heater's fan audibly faltered, its revolutions slowing as if starved of power. Elias strained his ears, and beneath the static's veil, he heard it again, that deep, resonant voice. A single, low phrase, impossible to decipher. It had the cadence of a name, perhaps. He terminated the entire setup. The desire to remain evaporated. His hands trembled as he disconnected the cables. He departed the casita swiftly that night, the click of the lock echoing his unease. In the weeks that followed, Elias shunned solitary screenings. He invited Leo over one Saturday afternoon for a short film. In the unambiguous light of day, the projector performed without flaw. No spectral flickers, no static intrusions, no phantom voices. Leo chuckled when Elias tentatively recounted the nocturnal anomalies, suggesting overwork. Elias forced a reciprocal laugh, but later that same evening, alone once more, he succumbed to the need to test it. Predictably, within minutes of initiating playback, the flicker materialized, the static crackled. The familiar chill crept like icy fingers across his back. His muscles instinctively tensed. He compelled himself to remain, resolved to observe, to endure. The audio began to fragment, intermittently supplanted by that uncanny simulation of spinning reels, the ghost of an analog machine haunting the digital present. The cold draft ebbed and flowed. He attempted a facade of nonchalance, but focus on the film proved impossible. Each flicker was a minor shock to his system. Each burst of static tightened his shoulders. When the low whisper breathed near him again, he almost vaulted from the chair. He tried to confront the unseen. "Hello?" he managed, his voice thin, unsteady. "Is anyone there?" Silence answered, save for the faintest exhalation, a dry, raspy sigh seeming to originate directly behind him. He whirled, finding only empty air. His heart pounded a frantic tattoo against his sternum, loud enough, it seemed, to fill the small space. He fled, hitting the projector's power switch as he passed, his gaze fixed on the escape offered by the door. He didn't pause to coil cables, driven by an urgent need for distance, for sanctuary. Back within the familiar solidity of his house, relief washed over him. The steady temperature, the mundane quiet of his living room, these felt like anchors to reality. He sat, attempting once more to weave a rational tapestry around the experiences, a subtle defect in the projector's complex circuitry, an esoteric wiring flaw within the casita itself. But those explanations felt inadequate, failing to encompass the invasive cold, the disembodied voice. He'd never encountered issues with other electronics stored or used there previously. Power tools had run without incident. Lights hadn't flickered. Something fundamental had shifted with the arrival, the activation of this particular machine. The thought of returning or selling it surfaced, yet the phenomena were stubbornly nocturnal, maddeningly inconsistent. Proving a defect seemed improbable, and beneath the fear, a part of him remained attached to the projector's aesthetic, to the dream of his personal cinema. He clung to the belief that he could diagnose, rectify, conquer the issue. But the reality was stark. Every evening, the prospect of entering the casita instilled a visceral dread. The moment he crossed the threshold, he'd brace for that wave of unnatural cold. His stomach would clench, his palms grow damp. This was the antithesis of the cozy refuge he'd envisioned. Eventually, Elias capitulated, ceasing nighttime viewings entirely. Daytime or late afternoon sessions remained untroubled, yet even in sunlight, the casita felt subtly altered, expectant. Occasionally, he'd catch a fleeting flicker from the corner of his eye, a visual echo, as if the projector were merely biding its time. He dismantled everything multiple times, cleaned the leans meticulously, updated the firmware, rearranged the furniture in futile attempts to disrupt the pattern. Nothing dissuaded the weird occurrences from returning under the cloak of darkness. Weeks have now passed without a solo nocturnal screening. He hosted a small group once, the film starting around 6, concluding by 8. No incidents marred the gathering, but the moment his friends departed, leaving him alone in the twilight, he felt compelled to test it. Within 5 minutes, the image trembled, and that distinct, chilling gust swept through the room. It persisted for perhaps 10 seconds, then vanished. It felt almost responsive, as if it reacted specifically to his solitude. Elias can no longer rationalize it away. This transcends a mere hardware malfunction. Something transpires in that outbuilding after dark, inextricably linked to this beautiful, unsettling machine. When he allows his thoughts to drift there, his hands grow clammy, his breathing quickens. The memory of that deep whisper, impossibly close, retains its chilling immediacy. He possesses no grand unifying theory, only the undeniable reality of the experience, potent enough to keep him perpetually on edge. Some nights, he finds himself standing at his back door, gazing across the shadowed lawn towards the dark silhouette of the casita, debating another foray, another test. Then the visceral memory returns, the knot in his gut, the rasp of static, the phantom voice grazing his ear. His skin crawls. Currently, the projector lies dormant, unplugged, its cables coiled within a box. He intends to leave them that way indefinitely. He has sworn off solitary use. Any future viewings will involve company, and strictly before nightfall claims the sky. He has begun tentatively browsing for a replacement projector, something modern, devoid of nostalgic pretense. Perhaps a new device will purge the space, yet a persistent sliver of doubt remains. Has the casita itself been altered? Has something anchored itself there? Certainty eludes him. Proof is non-existent. All Elias knows is this: The mere contemplation of powering up that projector after sunset evokes a physical weight in his chest. His love for cinema feels tainted, the joy shadowed. His dream of a private picture palace has soured into a source of profound anxiety. That's the current state. The projector sits shrouded, gathering dust, while Elias wrestles with the courage needed for another encounter. For now, daylight screenings on a mundane television inside the house must suffice. The casita will remain dark when night falls. He refuses to court further encounters with that strange, persistent flicker and the voices that have no place in the digital age. The asphalt ribboned into an ink-black void, swallowed by a night that felt unnaturally deep. Exhaustion clung like damp wool after the long hours, a heavy weight pressing down, urging Elias homeward toward the promise of oblivion in sleep. This familiar stretch of back road, usually a monotonous glide, tonight possessed a peculiar stillness, a held breath in the nocturnal air that pricked at his senses. Midnight had likely chimed unnoticed when a silhouette materialized at the edge of the headlight beams. A figure stood there, solitary, almost swallowed by the voluminous folds of a dark hooded garment, the face lost entirely to its cowl. One hand was raised, thumb jutting bone white against the gloom, the timeless plea of the roadside supplicant. Miles had unspooled without another sign of life, stirring a flicker of civic duty in Elias, yet something coiled tight in his gut, a primal warning. The obscured visage, the utter isolation, it bred hesitation. He kept the car moving, eyes fixed ahead, trying to dismiss the frisson of disquiet. But a glance in the rearview mirror snagged his gaze. The figure remained, a motionless sentinel, dwindling in the distance, watching. A cold prickle traced his spine, a strange, unwelcome sense of connection. Fatigue warred with unease, but the former won. He pressed onward, banishing the encounter. A few miles devoured, a false calm settling like dust, and then, impossibly, him, again. Stationed by the verge, identical posture, the same hooded stillness, the thumb extended. The pit of Elias's stomach iced over. Logic screamed denial. No vehicle had passed, no shortcut existed. His own speed had been constant. He swept past this second apparition, refusing the mirror this time, eyes glued forward. A frantic pulse hammered his ribs, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Coincidence? Another traveler? The rationalizations felt flimsy, hollow. An invasive certainty began to bloom. This presence, whatever it was, stalked his passage through the darkness. He drove faster, the engines drone a frail shield against the encroaching dread. Trees lining the road became gnarled, grasping shapes in the periphery, their shadows elongating, seeming to writhe. Focus became a battle, the image of the hooded figure superimposed on the road ahead. Another mile, perhaps two, slipped by. He coaxed himself back from the edge of panic, reasoning with the silence, the emptiness. Then, rounding a sharp bend, his breath hitched. There, not beside the road, but squarely in it, occupying the center line, facing the oncoming glare. Arms hung limp at its sides, utterly immobile. Elias slammed the brakes. Rubber shrieked protest against the asphalt. The car slewed to a halt, trapping the figure in the stark illumination of the headlights. Time stretched thin, distorted. He sat paralyzed, staring through the windshield. The shape didn't flinch, didn't react. A statue carved from shadow and stillness. A tide of primal terror surged, screaming at him to reverse, to flee, but his limbs were leaden, his gaze locked. Then, slowly, the cowl tilted upward. A face emerged from the darkness, lunar pale, spectral, utterly devoid of texture or life. Eyes like chips of obsidian, bottomless and cold, fixed upon him, boring into his soul with an intensity that felt like ice water in his veins. No expression softened the stark planes of that face, only that unwavering, vacant stare. Instinct, raw and potent, finally broke the spell. Gears ground, metal protesting as Elias threw the car into reverse. Tires bit and slipped on the tarmac. He wrenched the wheel, the car pivoting clumsily, then jammed the accelerator. The engine roared defiance as he fled back the way he came, heart battering his ribs like a trapped bird. His eyes darted compulsively to the rearview mirror, expecting, dreading, to see the figure standing there. But the mirror reflected only receding darkness, the empty ribbon of road swallowed by the night. Only the distant, hazy glow of his town lights, a fragile sanctuary on the horizon, allowed his foot to ease off the pedal. A ragged sigh escaped his lips, heavy with residual fear. Relief washed over him, potent but incomplete. Pulling into the familiar driveway, parking beneath the amber porch light, the disquiet returned, a cold shadow clinging to him. The street lay silent, deserted. Inside, bolts slid home with loud clicks, small assertions of security. He headed straight for the bathroom's bright sterility, hoping the familiar ritual of washing away the day's grime would cleanse this lingering dread. Under the harsh light, staring at his own reflection, sanity felt graspable, the encounter surreal, perhaps imagined. Then a sound, delicate yet insistent. Tap, tap, tapping. It seemed to emanate from the front door. Elias froze, water dripping unheeded from his hands, the sound amplifying in the sudden silence. Soft, rhythmic, persistent, like fingernails drumming lightly on wood. He moved cautiously, breath held, to the door. Peering through the peephole, his stomach twisted. Nothing. Only the empty porch, bathed in the sallow glow of the light. He listened intently. Silence. Perhaps the wind, a loose branch scraping. Then it came again, louder this time, more demanding. Tap, tap, tap. Heart hammering, he wrenched the door open, braced for confrontation. The porch was vacant, the street silent, the night air still and cool against his skin. Back inside, lock secured once more, he retreated to the living room, seeking refuge in the flickering distraction of the television. It was futile. The feeling persisted, an invisible weight in the room. Every floorboard creak, every settling groan of the old house echoed the night's unnerving encounter, conjuring the image of that pale face, those empty eyes. Exhaustion eventually dragged him under, into a shallow, dream-haunted sleep. Images flickered behind his eyelids. The hooded figure, the vacant stare, endlessly repeated. He woke abruptly in the dead hours, heart pounding, the darkness absolute. He lay rigid, listening, straining to hear past the thrum of his own blood. Silence reigned. Just as he began to relax, to dismiss it as nightmare residue, he heard it. Tap, tap, tap. Soft, metronomic, chillingly close. Not outside. Inside, the house. A cold dread bloomed, spreading through his veins. He sat bolt upright, straining his ears. The tapping continued, steady, relentless, rising stealthily, bare feet silent on the floorboards, he crept through the darkened house, drawn by the sound. It led him to the living room, seeming to originate from the large picture window overlooking the front yard. Heart a frantic drum against his ribs, breath catching in his throat, he approached the window. His fingers trembled as they found the edge of the heavy curtain. He pulled it aside. He was there, inches away, separated only by the thin pane of glass, that pallid mask of a face, pressed close, those void-like eyes staring directly into his. A hand, gaunt and pale, was splayed flat against the window pane, fingertips drumming that silent and chilling rhythm against the glass. Elias stumbled backward, a strangled cry caught in his throat, unable to tear his gaze away. The figure remained motionless save for the tapping fingers, its stare a physical weight, intense and unreadable. He turned, fleeing blindly down the hallway, slamming the bedroom door shut and fumbling with the lock. He slumped against the wood in the darkness, back pressed hard against the barrier, listening. The house fell utterly silent. The tapping ceased. He sat there for a long time, alone in the suffocating dark, wondering if the vigil outside the window continued. Dawn arrived, pale and indifferent. Elias checked every window, every door, searching the dew-kissed lawn and porch for any sign, any proof. There was nothing. No footprints disturbed the damp grass. No handprints marred the glass. No trace to suggest anyone had stood mere inches from his home. Yet the vision remained, seared into his memory. And sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the world outside is asleep, he hears it again, the faint phantom percussion echoing through the silence. A delicate tap-tap-tapping. A chilling reminder that somewhere, perhaps just beyond the light, it waits. Phantoms and fireside tales held little sway over me. Figments I readily dismissed, until a solitary night spent within the bones of my grandparents' ancestral farmhouse rearranged my convictions. Sequestered deep in the agrarian heartlands, the property stood aloof, a sentinel guarded by sprawling fields and a dense congregation of timber. Years had dissolved since my childhood visits, since before silence claimed my grandparents, leaving the house untenanted, adrift in time. My mother, anxious about its lonely state, sought occasional reassurance against trespassers or the whims of weather. And so, one autumn evening, I offered myself for the vigil. A simple task, I reasoned. A drive through winding lanes. A night cocooned in rural quietude. A return journey come morning. Perhaps a flicker of nostalgia, a ghost of memory resurrected. The farmhouse itself, though weathered, stood resolute, possessed of its own unique symphony of groans and sighs. Dusk was bleeding across the landscape as I arrived, bathing the stubbled fields in washes of ochre and bruised plum. It felt less like a house, and more like a preserved moment, my grandparents' presence lingering in the precise arrangement of worn armchairs, the stoic gazes in framed photographs. Crossing the threshold, I inhaled the distinct perfume of the place, an amalgam of settled dust, seasoned timber, and the faint, sweet decay peculiar to structures steeped in history. Floorboards lamented beneath my boots. The air hung dense, inviolate. A tremor, not entirely born of the evening chill, skittered across my skin, though I waved it away as mere apprehension. An empty house, nothing more. Depositing my overnight bag in the sitting room, I surveyed the space. A profound sense of intrusion settled upon me, despite the familial ties binding me to this dwelling. The quiet was palpable, a physical weight pressing down, punctuated only by the metronomic heartbeat of a tall case clock standing solemn sentinel in the corner. Room by room, I navigated the familiar geography, coaxing reluctant lights to life, attempting to dispel the encroaching eeriness, to assert some semblance of occupancy. An old house, I chided myself, prone to settling. My imagination was running riot. Darkness had fully descended by the time my inspection concluded. I'd elected to occupy my mother's girlhood chamber upstairs, situated at the corridor's terminus. A modest room, it held a narrow bed draped in a sun-bleached quilt, a sturdy dresser, and a window framing a view of the now obscured fields. As I tried to settle, the wind rose, a mournful sibilance through the skeletal branches outside. Lying back, I courted relaxation, yet the persistent prickle of unseen observation refused to subside. The isolation, the profound stillness, I reasoned, amplified unease, but the sensation intensified, tightening its grip as the hours drew on. I squeezed my eyes shut, summoning slumber, but the night magnified every trivial sound. The timbers groan, the foliage's restless whisper, the clock's relentless ticking from the floor below. Then a different sound surfaced, a soft, dry shuffling, unnervingly akin to footfalls. I bolted upright, pulse hammering against my ribs, ears straining against the quiet. Faint yet undeniable, the sound originated downstairs. Holding my breath, I sought mundane explanations. The house groaning under the wind's pressure, perhaps vermin skittering. But the steps possessed a rhythm, a deliberate cadence, traversing the lower level. My hand, trembling, fumbled for my phone, its screen casting a pallid, insufficient light. I crept towards the bedroom door, easing it open a fraction, peering into the shadowed hallway. Vacant, silent, yet the footsteps persisted below, slow, measured, as if someone were pacing the confines of the darkened rooms. An urge to call out seized me, but an invisible pressure clamped down, thickening the air, stealing my voice. Instead, I slipped into the corridor, bare feet padding soundlessly, my own heartbeat a frantic drum against the silence. Reaching the stairwell's precipice, I gazed into the Stygian gloom below. The footsteps had ceased. Only the clock's faint pulse remained. A ragged breath escaped me as I forced myself downward, step by cautious step, knuckles white on the banister. At the bottom, the silence crashed in, absolute and profound. I stood frozen, the phone's beam carving trembling arcs across the walls, elongating shadows into grotesque shapes. Everything appeared undisturbed, precisely as I'd left it, yet the awareness of being watched had become an almost physical presence. Ice traced a path down my spine. I pivoted, sweeping the light across the sitting room, and there it was, coalesced in the kitchen doorway, a silhouette, tenuous, barely substantial, yet irrefutably present, a darker patch of gloom detached from the ambient shadows, lingering just beyond definite perception. I stopped breathing, mind stuttering, struggling to reconcile sight with reason. A reflexive step backward, but the form remained static, impassive, watching. A primal command to flee screamed through me, but my limbs were anchors, rooted to the spot. Paralysis held me captive, eyes locked on the inscrutable figure. An immeasurable duration passed before the shadow began to dissolve, bleeding back into the surrounding darkness, leaving no trace. A shuddering gasp tore from my lungs, my grip on the phone convulsive. Retreating, shuffling backward toward the stairs, the frantic thudding in my chest threatened to suffocate me. Then, instinct took over. I spun and bolted, pounding up the staircase, slamming the bedroom door shut, the sound echoing unnaturally loud. The remainder of the night was a waking vigil, perched on the edge of the bed, spine rigid against the headboard, gaze fixed unwaveringly on the door. Every creak from the house's structure, every sigh of the wind became a harbinger of return. My rational mind offered desperate reassurances, tricks of light, shadows thrown by restless trees, but a deeper certainty resonated. I knew what I had witnessed. Sleep was an impossibility. I waited, besieged by fear, for the sanctuary of dawn. When the first tentative fingers of sunlight finally pierced the window pane, relief washed over me, potent and cleansing. Gathering my belongings with frantic haste, I descended the stairs almost at a run, eyes resolutely forward, refusing to scan the periphery. Stepping out into the crisp morning air felt like surfacing from deep water, a tangible weight lifted from my spirit. Inside the car, my hand still quaked as I turned the ignition. I drove away, the farmhouse receding in the rearview mirror, and did not look back. The events of that night remained my secret, unspoken to my mother. The house left to its solitude. I never returned. That thumb, hooked out from the roadside gloom like a question mark carved from bone, should have been my cue to accelerate. But solitude gnawed, fatigue frayed the edges of reason, a perilous alchemy on asphalt ribbons spooling into forever. I bled speed, the rig's air brakes sighing, headlights pinning a silhouette destined to etch itself onto the dark canvas behind my eyelids. Silas, that's me. 20 years wrestling 18 wheels across the continent, convinced the road had shown me its full hand. Delusion. Nothing primes you for a night like that one, somewhere on a forgotten vein of the old highway network. 14 hours swallowed, chasing a dispatcher's deadline. Static had long ago consumed the radio. The thermos, like my own reserves, held only lukewarm dregs. The highway's hypnotic pulse was breeding phantoms in the periphery, making the dashed lines writhe. Then, him, a solitary sculpture against the vast indifference of the night, thumb starkly erect. In the fleeting geometry of the side mirror, our eyes snagged. A jolt went through me, something primal, screaming danger, yet exhaustion, that insidious traitor, won out. The truck protested, shuddering to a halt beside the waiting shape. Through the looking glass of the mirror, I tracked his approach. He moved with a peculiar staccato rhythm, a loose-limbed puppet navigating unseen strings. Closer now, details sharpened under the spill of the cab lights. Tall, skeletal, draped in a flimsy jacket, inadequate for the desert chill that crept in after sundown. His face was a topography of sharp ridges and deep valleys, shadows clinging possessively. "Destination?" I called, the word feeling clumsy as he reached the passenger side. His reply scraped the air, like stones grinding in a dry creek bed. "Where the road takes you." Every nerve fiber vibrated with a single imperative. Drive. floor it, leave this wrongness behind. Instead, a misplaced filament of obligation, or perhaps morbid curiosity, made my hand snake across to flick the lock. He folded himself into the cab, his movements retaining that disjointed quality. An aroma accompanied him, damp earth, rich and loamy, laced with a faint, sharp tang like old rust or ozone. I pulled back onto the blacktop, trying to breathe shallowly. "Silas," I offered, mostly to puncture the oppressive quiet. He swiveled that unnerving gaze towards me. A pause stretched, taut and thin. "Malachi." He finally breathed. Malachi. Of course, sounded about as authentic as a $3 bill, but you learn things hauling freight across lonely miles, and rule number one when dealing with the roadside unknown is let sleeping dogs, or whatever they are, lie. Silence descended again, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the drone of the tires and the suicidal thwack of insects against the windscreen. I stole glances. Something about Malachi felt profoundly alien. His stillness wasn't repose, it was a terrible, coiled tension, as if his own skin were an ill-fitting garment. "So," I ventured, the quiet becoming unbearable, "where you drifting from, Malachi?" He didn't respond at first, eyes fixed on the rushing darkness beyond the glass. When he spoke, his voice held a strange, resonant distance. "From a city bleached by a sun that never dips, where the alleyways echo with the clatter of bones underfoot." A nervous chuckle escaped me. "Sounds rough. Maybe Albuquerque on a bad night." Malachi offered no answering smile. Those hollowed eyes simply found mine again. "You cannot conceive," he murmured, the words barely disturbing the air. Suddenly, the spacious cab felt claustrophobic, the air unnaturally frigid. I nudged the heater up, but the chill seemed to emanate from my passenger, a localized pocket of deep cold. Miles dissolved under the wheels, each one amplifying my disquiet. Malachi's presence felt like a blot, absorbing the ambient warmth, deepening the shadows that danced just beyond the reach of my high beams. The familiar road felt strange, hostile. I was mentally rehearsing suggesting the next truck stop when Malachi spoke again, his voice soft but carrying. "Do you entertain notions of monstrosity, Silas?" The question landed like ice down my spine. "Can't say I dwell on it," I managed, aiming for nonchalance, my hands clenching the wheel. He turned fully towards me then, the emptiness in his eyes seeming to deepen, to pull. "You will." "Look, friend," I started, my voice tight. "I don't know what kind of game you're—" The sentence died unfinished, because Malachi shifted. It began subtly, a subcutaneous ripple beneath his pallid skin, like water disturbed under a thin membrane. Then his face seemed to lose its structure, features flowing, melting, reforming into contours that defied human geometry. Horror paralyzed me as his fingers elongated, joints cracking, stretching into needle-sharp talons that shredded the worn fabric of his gloves. Instinct screamed louder than terror. I stomped the brakes. The rig slewed violently, tires screaming on the pavement. My hand scrabbled for the door latch, a desperate bid for ejection. But Malachi, or the entity wearing his form, was impossibly fast. A clawed limb shot out, clamping onto my forearm with crushing, cold strength. A raw sound tore from my throat. Pain, fear, disbelief. "Leaving so soon, Silas," the thing rasped, the voice a resonant blasphemy, a horrifying echo of Malachi's dry tones. "The unveiling has just commenced." Blind panic fueled a wild swing. My fist met something yielding yet resistant, like cold, dense clay. The creature emitted a high, ululating shriek that vibrated in my teeth. Its grip faltered, fractionally, but enough. I ripped my arm free, flung the door open, and threw myself out, hitting the unforgiving asphalt with a sickening thud. Agony flared in my shoulder, but adrenaline was a merciless engine. I scrambled upright, legs pumping, running blindly into the night, refusing the urge to look back. A sound like tortured metal rending split the air, followed by a guttural, inhuman roar that shook the ground. Against all reason, I risked a glance over my shoulder. The sight nearly stopped my already laboring heart. The thing had exploded upwards through the truck's cab roof as if it were wet paper. It loomed against the starlight, a grotesque silhouette of mismatched textures, patches of slick hide, coarse fur, maybe even scales. Its face a nightmarish rictus of fangs, framing eyes that burned with malevolent phosphorescence. I ran harder than I knew possible, lungs searing, the highway stretching before me like a dark, indifferent throat. Behind me, I heard it, heavy, rhythmic impacts on the pavement. It wasn't chasing, not really. It was pacing me, drawing out the terror. Just as my legs threatened to buckle, a distant glimmer resolved into light. The fluorescent halo of a gas station, a fragile sanctuary in the oppressive dark. Hope surged, lending strength to my failing limbs. I prayed. Abruptly, the sounds of pursuit ceased. Another stolen glance. The creature was receding, flowing back towards the roadside brush, its form seeming to condense, to shrink towards the human-adjacent shape it had worn, before being swallowed by the shadows. I staggered into the pool of light bathing the gas station forecourt, breath tearing through me in ragged gasps. Inside, an attendant glanced up from a dog-eared magazine, his eyes widening at the spectacle I presented. "Hey buddy, everything all right?" he asked, hand already drifting towards the phone. Words failed me. I could only shake my head, collapsing onto the cool, cracked linoleum. While the attendant spoke urgently into the receiver, my eyes remained fixed on the highway outside, searching the impenetrable darkness, half expecting to see those twin embers ignite and fix upon me. The flashing blues and reds arrived with reassuring speed, slicing through the night. They found the rig abandoned, its cab ripped open like a tin can. Of Malachi, or the horror he'd become, there was no trace. My story met predictable skepticism. Exhaustion, dehydration, maybe a bad reaction to something ingested miles back. But the deep, precise gouges on my forearm resisted easy explanation. So did the disturbingly non-human tracks pressed into the soft shoulder near the truck. That night ended my life on the road. The thought of climbing back into a cab, of facing those endless solitary stretches of darkness. Impossible. Some nights, sleep offers no refuge, jolting me awake with the phantom glow of those eyes, the memory of that voice twisting familiar sounds into threats. What Malachi was, where it slunk off to, I'll never comprehend. But I know this: the darkness holds teeth, and things beyond our reckoning sometimes stand by the roadside, waiting. So, if the highway finds you alone under a canopy of indifferent stars, and a solitary figure signals for passage, keep your foot down, press on, because the passenger you invite in might be carrying more than just baggage. As for me, daylight is my preferred traveling companion now, and my passenger seat will remain forever empty. Some journeys carry too high a toll. Dawn etched the first unsettling geometry onto the bark of an ancient pine flanking our camp. By the time twilight bled through the canopy, we were ensnared, prisoners within a sylvan expanse that had curdled from refuge to threat. What began as a pilgrimage to tranquility, a weekend consecrated to shedding the world, devolved into a primal scramble against shadows, against an artistry of fear we couldn't fathom. It was meant to restore us, this escape. My companions, Reese, ever the anchor, Maya with her quiet sensitivity, Finn masking nerves with bravado, and I had dreamt of this for months. We'd unearthed a haven deep within the state preserve, leagues from the nearest hamlet or the faintest whisper of a signal, an ideal crucible for dissolving urban anxieties and forging anew our bond with the wild. Arrival came bathed in the slanted gold of late Friday afternoon, the sun already hemorrhaging light below the serrated tree line as canvas shelters rose and flames tentatively licked the kindling. Laughter spooled into the cooling air, punctuated by the hiss of melting sugar and the shared rhythm of traded histories. When slumber finally claimed us, only the fire's embers sighed, accompanied by the susurrus of leaves stirred by an indifferent breeze. I surfaced before the others, drawn by the pre-dawn luminescence and slipping from my tent into the chill air. And there it was, incised into the coarse hide of a colossal oak, stark at eye level, resided the glyph. It suggested both archaic rune and intricate circuitry, a collision of severe angles and interwoven pathways. Reese, Finn, Maya? My voice, a conspiratorial murmur in the vast quiet. You need to see this. They emerged one by one, blinking against the nascent light, vestiges of sleep clinging to them. The drowsiness evaporated as they clustered near the marked sentinel, replaced by a shared, furrowed perplexity. "What is it?" Maya breathed, her fingers hovering near the carving, hesitant to bridge the gap. "No earthly idea," I admitted. "It wasn't there last night, surely." A collective, silent negation. Erecting camp, we'd have brushed against it, noticed such a deliberate violation of the bark. Maybe nocturnal hikers, some ritual? Finn offered, though the suggestion lacked conviction. We were deliberately adrift from any marked path or designated site. Reese, pragmatic as ever, offered a dismissive shoulder shrug. Some bored teenager's prank, likely, doesn't change breakfast plans. Coffee. We attempted to excise it from our thoughts, immersing ourselves in the day's planned diversions. tracing the silver thread of a nearby stream for elusive fish, charting the contours of the immediate woods, breathing deep the scent of loam and pine. Yet the symbol lingered, a psychic splinter. I'd catch Reese casting furtive glances towards the oak, see Maya's gaze drift uneasily towards the tree line, feel Finn's forced jocularity fray at the edges. The woods themselves seemed altered. What had felt welcoming now felt watchful, the air heavier, the silence charged. Trees pressed closer, their boughs like arthritic fingers reaching. More than once, a flicker of motion at the periphery of my vision. A deer, a trick of light, vanished upon direct inspection, leaving only a residue of unease. Returning to the campsite as the sun ignited the western horizon, weariness warred with a desperate craving for the familiar circle of tents. It was then the true scope of our predicament unfurled. "Ilara!" Maya's voice was strained, thin as spider silk. "Look, just look around." We obeyed. A glacial chill sluiced through me. Every significant tree girdling our small encampment now bore a sigil. Some mirrored the initial glyph, others presented novel, more baroque configurations. They formed an unbroken perimeter, a demarcation of space that felt less like boundary and more like cage. "Right, the joke's officially dead," Finn snapped, his usual swagger utterly absent. "Who the hell is doing this?" The unspoken answer hung heavy. No one could have achieved this intricate vandalism undetected. We'd been present, moving through or near this very spot, all day. "We're leaving," I declared, surprised at the steadiness that infused my tone. "Now!" There was no dissent. A frantic energy seized us as we collapsed shelters, stuffed sleeping bags, gathered our scattered belongings. But when Reese slid behind the wheel, turning the ignition key, a new dread materialized. Silence, not even a cough from the engine. He tried again and again. Utter lifelessness, as if the vehicle's vital spark had been siphoned away. "Impossible," Finn protested. "The battery's new. We drove it in without a hitch." Futile attempts confirmed the reality. We were marooned. As true darkness descended, we huddled near the resurrected fire, its flickering light casting our shadows, long and dancing, against the inscrutable backdrop of marked trees. The symbols seemed to absorb the firelight, pulsing with a subtle, internal luminescence that felt profoundly wrong. "What now?" Maya whispered, her voice fragile, lost in the immense night. "Wait for morning." I projected a confidence I didn't possess. "Hike out at first light. The main road can't be more than a day's trek." Yet a corrosive doubt gnawed within. This forest felt fundamentally different from the one we'd entered. Alien, sentient, and deeply inimical. Sleep eluded us all. We maintained a rotating vigil, though for what specific horror, none could say. The woods pulsed with disquieting acoustics, sussurrations that coalesced just beyond comprehension, the sharp retort of branches fracturing under weight that left no tracks. Once, chillingly, I felt my own name breathed from the Stygian blackness encircling our fragile pool of light. When dawn finally fractured the oppressive dark, we moved with desperate haste, stripping down to essentials. The inert vehicle and superfluous gear were abandoned. With backpacks cinched tight, We plunged into the woods, aiming for where the road should lie. Hours bled away under a climbing sun, yet the landscape refused to align with our inward map. Familiar contours failed to materialize, expected landmarks remained stubbornly absent, and the symbols persisted, relentless. Each trunk we passed wore one, a breadcrumb trail laid by a malevolent hand, leading us deeper into the labyrinth. Fatigue and fear began to erode our composure, patience frayed, spawning sharp words over trivialities. The forest itself seemed to conspire against us, the trees weaving into denser thickets, the undergrowth tangling like grasping claws. Direction became fluid, unreliable. Disorientation bloomed into a constant companion. It was Maya who noticed the evolution. "They're changing," she murmured, pointing. The glyphs we now encountered were altered, imbued with a terrifying complexity, almost seeming to writhe upon the bark. They metastasized beyond the trees, appearing etched onto moss-slicked boulders, traced in the damp earth, even composed from meticulously arranged constellations of fallen leaves. As the sun commenced its slow descent, raw panic took root. Lost, depleted, no closer to salvation than when we'd begun. "We have to stop," Reese rasped, giving voice to our shared exhaustion. "Can't navigate this in the dark." We stumbled into a small, less choked clearing, making a rudimentary camp. No one uttered the word fire. An instinctive, primal caution stayed our hands. Advertising our presence felt profoundly unwise. That night remains an abyss in memory. The blackness was absolute, a viscous entity that smothered light and sound. Yet it teemed with noise, whispers like dry leaves skittering over stone, furtive footfalls just beyond sight, bizarre, clicking vocalizations unlike any known fauna. We huddled together, a knot of shared terror, eyes stretched wide in the impenetrable dark, sleep an impossible luxury. Things moved out there. More than once, I sensed a proximity so intense, so immediate. I felt I could reach out and touch cool, textured skin or rough bark. But paralysis held me captive, breath trapped in my lungs. Morning revealed fresh sigils encircling our meager camp, rendered in a viscous, dark fluid that looked terrifyingly biological. Rationality shattered. We ran. Coherent navigation forgotten, we simply fled, propelled by blind animal terror, crashing through vegetation, heedless of scratches and stumbles, desperate only for escape. Time dissolved in the suffocating sameness of the woods. Then, abruptly, explosively, we burst from the tree line onto the hard, blessed relief of pavement. A road. We collapsed onto the asphalt, lungs burning, chests heaving, scarcely processing the impossible reality of it. A vehicle shimmered in the distance, decelerating as it neared. An older man, his face etched with lines of ordinary kindness, lowered his window. "You folks okay?" Concern softened his gaze. We must have been a horrifying spectacle, smeared with dirt, latticed with scratches, eyes wide with residual terror. Our story tumbled out, a chaotic, overlapping torrent of fear and disbelief. He listened, his expression shifting from curiosity to profound confusion. When our frantic narrative subsided, he remained silent for a beat, brow deeply furrowed. "Said you were camping up in Blackwood Ridge?" he asked finally. We nodded, a desperate synchronicity. He shook his head, a slow, deliberate motion. Can't be right. Blackwood Ridge. The whole area burned flat 20 years back. Massive wildfire. Nothing up there now but charcoal and saplings. We gaped at him, then at each other, the world tilting violently. How? We had spent 2 nights immersed in a vibrant, ancient forest. We had felt the rough bark, seen the impossible carvings. Sensing our fractured state, the man's features gentled. "Look," he said softly, "let's get you to town. Clearly you've been through something, even if I can't figure the what of it." As we crammed into the sanctuary of his car, I risked a final glance towards the forest's edge. For a sliver of a second, framed against the dense green, a figure stood. Tall, impossibly slender, seemingly woven from shadow, twisted branches, and desiccated leaves. And emblazoned upon its chest, pulsing with a faint cold light, was the original glyph. It lifted a limb, a hand, a branch, in a gesture that might have been acknowledgement or farewell. I blinked, and the space where it stood was empty. We never articulated the full truth of what transpired in those woods. The story was too fractured, too unbelievable. Yet the experience remains embedded, a shard of ice in the soul. Sometimes, in the deepest hours of the night, the whispers return, faint but distinct, and behind my closed eyelids, the symbols burn, etched as permanently in my mind as they were upon those phantom trees. Whatever entity resided in that impossible forest, whatever anomalous pocket of reality we stumbled into, I carry the chilling certainty. It persists, watching from its hidden dimension, and a cold dread whispers that someday, somehow, its reach might find us again. Work had become a blur of anonymous highways and interchangeable motel rooms, a transient existence I endured more than embraced. This particular leg deposited me in Oak Haven, Washington, a town etched onto the map, with little more than a few skeletal blocks of commerce, twin gas stations shimmering under weary lights, and a solitary diner promising sustenance. Just beyond its meager sprawl stood my lodging, the Hemlock Inn, an edifice worn ragged by time, its grandeur long since surrendered to neglect. Yet it was the sole haven available, and frankly, my exhaustion craved only oblivion, a mattress indifferent to thread count. The woman presiding over the check-in counter, Agnes, offered a glance as fleeting and substantial as a moth's wing beat. A tarnished brass key skittered across the worn laminate towards me. She muttered about the elevator's indefinite retirement, her attention already retreating to the luminous screen of her phone. Hefting my overnight bag, I located the stairwell, its air thick with dust motes dancing in the weak light, and began the ascent. 3 flights up, the promised floor awaited. The silence here felt profound, amplifying the whisper of my own footsteps on the threadbare carpet, a tapestry of faded florals and ambiguous stains. An olfactory ghost haunted the air, stale tobacco clinging stubbornly beneath a veneer of harsh disinfectant. A scent determined to embed itself in memory. Room 312. The number swam slightly, Inafuochi, on the cheap plastic tag attached to the key. The lock yielded with a protesting groan, the door swinging inward on reluctant hinges. Austerity was its defining principle. A bed sagging slightly in the middle, a solitary nightstand. a television perched like a dark, unblinking eye atop a scarred dresser. Heavy drapes, bleached by decades of sun, guarded the single window. It was meager, yes, but sufficient. My bag landed with a soft thud on the questionable quilt. Shoes kicked aside, I sank onto the mattress, a geography of tired springs sighing beneath me. Unpacking felt like an insurmountable effort. Instead, my laptop emerged, its familiar glow a small anchor in the gloom. Emails checked, work pushed aside. I let the weariness begin its slow claim. Eventually, a hollow ache in my stomach announced itself. The diner, glimpsed earlier, beckoned. Wallet secured, room key pocketed, I locked the creaking door of 312 behind me. Downstairs, the lobby echoed with emptiness. Agnes had vanished, leaving only the hum of a tired fluorescent bulb above the vacant desk. No need for pleasantries. Outside, the night air felt cool against my skin. My car started with a familiar rumble, carrying me back towards the town's faint pulse, towards the promise of coffee and something warm. Returning felt different. The Hemlock Inn now seemed less neglected, more spectral. The parking lot, previously dotted with a few vehicles, stood utterly barren under the moonless sky. Inside, the lobby remained a tomb, bathed in the sickly yellow cast of that single overhead light. A yawn cracked my jaw as I trudged up the stairs again, the image of the sagging mattress pulling me onward. But reaching the third floor, a prickle of unease traced its way up my spine. The corridor seemed to have swallowed the meager light that had existed before. The air felt colder, stagnant, holding its breath. Fatigue, I reasoned, the late hour weaving illusions. I paced the hallway, footsteps muffled by the decrepit carpet, counting the doors, seeking the familiar number. 310, 311. Then, nothing. Just an expanse of faded, water-stained wallpaper where 312 ought to have been. I halted, staring. My brain stuttered, refusing to reconcile the image before me with the certainty of my memory. Tired, yes, profoundly so, but not delusional. The groan of the door, the specific scent of dust and old fabric within that room, my laptop resting expectantly on the bed. These felt concrete, real. I pivoted, scanning the length of the passage, searching for any irregularity, any seam or outline suggesting a hidden door. Nothing, just the unrelenting blank stretch of wall, standing stubbornly between rooms, 311 and 313. Room 312 had been swallowed whole. A knot of icy dread tightened in my gut. A mistake? Wrong floor? No, impossible. I'd counted the landings, walked this exact path less than an hour ago. Taking a ragged breath, attempting to impose calm on the frantic thrumming in my chest, I descended once more to the lobby. Agnes was back, miraculously, head bowed over a dog-eared magazine, seemingly oblivious. I approached the counter, my hands trembling almost imperceptibly. A forced cough, her head lifted, eyebrows arching with a vacant sort of inquiry, as if seeing me for the first time. "Help you?" she intoned, her voice flat, devoid of inflection. "Yes," I began, swallowing against a suddenly dry throat. "My room, 312? I seem to have misplaced it." A long moment of scrutiny passed, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Room 312? She repeated, the number sounding alien on her lips. "That's right," I confirmed, attempting a reassuring smile that felt grotesque on my face. Third floor, just down the hall. I was in there not long ago, but now the door is gone. Her expression remained utterly impassive, carved from indifference. "Sir," she stated with unnerving finality, "we have no room 312. A chill, sharp and invasive, skittered down my spine. "But I checked in earlier. You gave me the key." She shook her head slowly, a gesture of dismissal. "Must be some mistake. Rooms stop at 3-on-1 on that floor. Never been a 312. Words of protest formed, then withered unspoken. Something in her vacant stare, a profound lack of connection to the reality I knew, silenced me. "My belongings," I managed, the words thin, reedy. "My bag is up there, my computer." She sighed, a sound heavy with practiced boredom, as if fielding absurdities was her nightly burden. "Look, sir, I don't know what you think happened, but there isn't any room 312. The urge to argue, to demand, warred with a rising tide of primal fear. I offered a weak, mumbled apology, some incoherent excuse, and retreated from the counter, acutely aware of her gaze following me until I cleared the lobby doors. Back I went, compelled by a desperate need for proof, my own footsteps echoing like accusations in the hollow stairwell. The third floor waited, unchanged. Down the corridor, I walked, heart hammering against my ribs, tallying the doors with grim precision. 301, the blank, indifferent wall. 313, nothing. It simply wasn't there. I stood before the empty space, touching the cool, slightly textured wallpaper, feeling the solid continuity of the wall beneath. My mind felt fractured, adrift. The room had existed. I had occupied it. Now it was less than a ghost. It was an impossibility. What recourse was there? Exhaustion warred with burgeoning panic, my thoughts skittering, unable to grasp the illogical reality. Turning to retreat, I nearly collided with a figure standing mere feet away, materialized from the shadows. He was tall, unnervingly composed, his dark hair immaculate, dressed in a suit too sharp, too pristine for this decaying establishment. His stare was direct, cold, unsettlingly devoid of judgment or curiosity. "Is there a problem?" His voice was low, resonant, barely disturbing the heavy silence. My heart leaped into my throat. I was looking for my room," I stammered, taking an involuntary step back. "Room 312. No flicker of surprise crossed his features. He remained perfectly still, his gaze unwavering. "There is no room 312, he stated, the words delivered with absolute certainty. Frustration, laced with terror, surged through me. "I know what I saw. I checked in. My things are—" He tilted his head slightly, a minuscule, almost reptilian movement. "You are mistaken." The urge to shout, to rail against this shared delusion, choked me. His presence was suffocating, diminishing. Suddenly, I was the anomaly, the trespasser, in a reality that had shifted beneath my feet. "I don't understand," I whispered, the sound barely audible. He took a single deliberate step closer, his eyes locking onto mine, pinning me in place. "You should leave now," he advised, his tone soft, yet carrying an undeniable weight of command. "There is nothing for you at the Hemlock Inn." Protest died on my lips. A sheen of cold perspiration broke out across my forehead. My pulse roared in my ears. Numbly, I nodded, backing away slowly before turning and fleeing towards the stairs. I didn't pause, didn't look back until I burst through the main doors and into the indifferent cool of the night. I stood there, gulping air, my body trembling. The imposing silhouette of the hotel, looming behind me like a silent, watchful predator. I didn't re-enter. Keys fumbled, engine catching. I drove. Oakhaven dissolved in my rearview mirror, swallowed by the darkness. Weeks have bled into months, yet the chill of that night remains, a phantom limb of memory. Attempts to call the Hemlock Inn yield only the sterile pronouncement of a disconnected line. What became of room 312, who Mr. Silas truly was? Why Agnes regarded me as a stranger? These questions remain unanswered, perhaps unanswerable. All I know with bone-deep certainty is that Oakhaven holds a piece of my sanity I'll never dare retrieve. The wipers swept arcs of futility across the glass, the deluge outside a ceaseless drumming curtain. Through the smeary pane, I strained my eyes, hunting for a glimmer, any beacon in the drowning world. Then, materializing from the downpour's grey heart, a silhouette, thumb stark against the watery gloom. A choice, instantaneous and seismic, shifted within me. The hiss of tires on wet asphalt announced my surrender. I pulled over. My name is Elara. What follows is the anatomy of a kindness curdled. A night spun into a persistent, waking dread. The day had stretched thin, frayed by miles and monotony. 3 states lay behind me, remnants of a conference dissolving in the rearview mirror. This implacable rain, however, had anchored me, slowing my return to a crawl. Weariness was a physical weight, frustration a bitter taste. I craved my own sheets, the familiar quiet of home. Seeing him there, a sodden statue on the roadside, my first impulse was primal. Drive on. Yet his sheer vulnerability under the sky's assault snagged at something within me. A cruel night to be stranded. Easing the car onto the sodden shoulder, my pulse hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs as the figure approached. Tall, sinewy, dark hair plastered like wet kelp to his brow. When he wrenched the passenger door open, a miasma drifted in. Damp wool, earth, and an undercurrent, sharp and vaguely chemical. "Appreciate the stop," he murmured, offering a smile that remained adrift, never mooring in his eyes. "Thought I might take root out here." "No trouble," I managed, aiming for nonchalance, my voice a traitorous tremor. "Destination?" "Just up ahead," he replied, a study in vagueness. "I'll point the way." Merging back into the river of road, I risked sideways glances. Younger than I'd first assumed, perhaps late 20s. His clothes, though worn, seemed cared for, but an unnerving focus radiated from him, a stillness that prickled my skin. Silence swelled between us, punctuated only by the wiper's hypnotic swish and the rain's relentless percussion on the roof. Then, his voice, low and disturbingly resonant, sliced the quiet. "So, Elara, the conference went well?" The car lurched as my foot spasmed. How do you know my name? The conference?" A chuckle, dry and brittle, scraped the air, raising gooseflesh along my arms. "Oh, I know quite a bit, Elara. 1542 Elm Street, your golden retriever, Bruno, and the salient fact that picking up strangers, especially on nights sculpted from ink and water, is ill-advised." My thoughts scattered like startled birds. Impossible. This man was an unknown quantity, a face never before registered. Or was he? Who are you?" The demand emerged thin, frayed with panic. He turned then, a slow rotation of his head, and his eyes locked onto mine. What I saw there froze the marrow in my bones, a glint of something ancient, rapacious, hunger. "You don't recognize me, Alara. I'm wounded. We've crossed paths. Often, really. You simply haven't noticed." Flickers ignited behind my eyes. Phantom images, half-caught glimpses. This man, incongruously present at the periphery of my days. Browsing the aisle behind me at the market. A shadow leaning against the wall opposite my office. Walking Bruno in the park, just out of focus. How? How had I been so blind? "What is it you want?" I fought to keep the wobble from my voice. "Less about my wants, Alara, more about yours. Those subterranean desires you fence off. You're suffocating in the predictability, aren't you? This tidy life, it chafes. That's the real reason you stopped tonight. A yearning for the edge, a whisper of peril." His words struck a discordant chord, unsettlingly true. A restlessness had been brewing, a dissatisfaction with the metronome rhythm of my existence, but this felt like a plunge into delirium. "You're mistaken," I countered, injecting a firmness I didn't feel. "It was raining. Pity. That's the sum of it." Laughter again, echoing strangely, seeming to expand and fill the small space. "Ah, Ilara, ever the altruist, polishing the halo. But that narrative doesn't quite encompass the whole story, does it?" My grip tightened on the wheel, knuckles blanching. "I want you out of my car, right now." "Regrettably," he said, his tone acquiring a flinty edge, "that option isn't available. Our transaction isn't concluded. Far from it." Panic flared, hot and suffocating. Escape. I needed an exit, any turnoff, a place with lights, with people. My foot pressed down, the engine whining in protest as the car surged forward into the unyielding dark. "A futile gesture, Ilara," he observed, his calm infuriating. "There's nowhere to run. Just this ribbon of road, you and me." He was right. The highway stretched, desolate and black, swallowed by the night. A chilling disorientation washed over me. Where were we? How long had we been driving? Time felt warped, elastic. Hours might have bled away. "What did you do?" My voice was a threadbare whisper. "Nothing you didn't sanction," he replied softly. "You invited me in, Ilara. You unlatched the door." As if summoned by his words, the engine coughed, sputtered, and died. We drifted to a halt on the verge, plunged into absolute darkness, the rain drumming a funereal beat. I twisted the key. Silence. The ignition was dead. "Impeccable timing," the man breathed, that disquieting smile ghosting across his lips again. "Shall we adjourn outside?" "I'm not going anywhere with you," I stated, willing courage into my voice. He sighed, a sound of theatrical disappointment. Ilara, still resisting the current? You have no agency here. You never did." His hand reached across the console. I flinched back, scrabbling for the door handle. Locked, solid, immovable, trapped. "Don't struggle," he murmured, his voice hypnotic. "Yielding makes it smoother." His fingers closed around my forearm, and a bizarre decoupling sensation flooded me. Reality shimmered, colors bleeding at the edges, the world tilting on its axis. His voice seemed to echo from a vast distance, the final sound before the void swallowed me. Welcome to the narrative you craved, Ilara. Do try to enjoy the journey. I awoke gasping in my own bed. Sunlight, sharp and definite, sliced through the blinds. Disorientation clung like mist. A dream? A nightmare forged from exhaustion? Then my eyes fell on the nightstand. My heart seized. A small folded piece of paper lay there. Scrawled in unfamiliar handwriting were 5 words. Thanks for the lift. See you soon. In the ensuing weeks, I waged war against my own mind, attempting to categorize the event as a phantasm born of stress. Yet an intrinsic shift had occurred, undeniable and terrifying. I'd catch him, fleetingly, everywhere. A flicker in a shop window's reflection. A figure turning a corner just as I looked up. Gone when I focused. I changed the locks, installed cameras, fled my apartment for another. Futile gestures. He remained, a constant peripheral presence, watching, waiting. And the most insidious part, a sliver of me, dark and unacknowledged, thrilled to it. The peril, the sheer unknowability. It had stirred something dormant. Now, writing this, the line between sanity and delusion blurs. Am I fracturing? Or did I, on that rain-lashed highway, truly unlock a door to something malevolent? Certainty eludes me. My own senses are suspect. Every passing stranger wears his potential face. Every secured lock feels fragile. Consider this then, a cautionary tale etched in fear. Should you find yourself on a dark road, the rain falling like judgment, and see a lone figure seeking passage, keep driving. Steel your heart, because the thing you let in might just decide to stay forever. The stylus trembled above the digital screen, a conduit poised to siphon the ink of the next significant narrative. Excavating truths was my vocation, the pursuit of buried stories my relentless drive, yet none had pulsed with the dark magnetism of this one. A sequence of vanishings, like stitches pulled from the fabric of this secluded hamlet, had ensnared my journalistic instincts. I felt compelled to unravel the enigma, unaware that my path descended into a primordial abyss, a confrontation with horrors that defied mortal comprehension awaiting me. My name is Ilara Vance. For nearly 10 years, the labyrinthine world of investigative reporting has been my domain. From the shadowed corridors of political intrigue to the stark landscapes of ecological ruin, my pen has charted diverse territories. But this was aberrational. 6 souls spirited away within a year, each plucked from the somnolent embrace of Havenwood Hollow, a town cradled deep within the Appalachian folds. The local constabulary was flummoxed, a creeping paranoia tightening its grip on the townsfolk. It possessed all the hallmarks of a defining story: enigma, urgency, the potential to illuminate shadowed corners. Thus, armed with my editor's sanction, I journeyed toward Havenwood Hollow. Census sign whispering a population of 2,043 souls. A figure perhaps no longer accurate. An atmospheric pressure, thick with unspoken anxieties, greeted my arrival. Main Street, which ought to have thrummed with the rhythms of rural life, lay unnervingly quiescent. proprietors behind dusty shop windows tracked my passage with narrowed eyes. Conversations died on the air the moment I crossed the threshold of the town's lone eatery. My initial port of call was the sheriff's department. Sheriff Silas Blackwood presented a formidable figure, his countenance etched by time and weariness, his gaze heavy. An initial reticence clung to him, a wall I chipped away at with persistent inquiry until fissures appeared in his stoicism. "Listen," he confided, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial rasp as he leaned across the worn desk. "Something's fundamentally wrong here. No remains, no clues, not so much as a scuffed heel print. It's as if they dissolved into the ether." My stylus flew across the screen, capturing fragments as my thoughts raced, constructing and discarding theories. "Is there any thread connecting these individuals?" I probed. A slow shake of his head. "Nothing tangible. Varied ages, disparate lives, different occupations. The sole commonality, each disappearance occurred proximate to Whisperwood." Whisperwood. The name itself induced an involuntary frisson, a cold dread whose origins remained obscure. Offering my thanks to the sheriff, I departed, my course now irrevocably set. The forest reared before me, an imposing rampart of primeval timber stretching toward an indifferent horizon. Standing at its verge, the unnerving sensation of being observed prickled my skin. Shadows seemed to writhe with unseen life, and the breeze carried susurrations just beyond the edge of understanding. The ensuing days were a tapestry woven from interviews, fragments gleaned from reticent locales. Many sealed their lips, but a few whispered tales that chilled the marrow, accounts of anomalous lights flickering deep within the woods, of spectral chanting drifting on nocturnal winds, of those who ventured into its depths and were consumed. One evening, immersed in my notes within the sterile confines of my motel room, a sharp rap echoed on the door. Opening it revealed an elderly woman, her eyes wide, reflecting a profound terror. "You must cease," she hissed, her voice brittle with fear. "Your digging will summon them upon us all." Before my startled mind could formulate a question, she thrust a crumpled parchment into my grasp and scuttled away into the twilight. With unsteady hands, I smoothed the paper. It depicted a rudimentary map of Whisperwood, a specific locale starkly marked in crimson ink. Prudence screamed to contact the authorities, to relinquish this potentially perilous chart. Yet the core of my being, the journalist's insatiable hunger for revelation, silenced caution. I was compelled to witness the truth firsthand. The following dusk found me stationed at Whisperwood's edge, flashlight clutched tight, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. The designated point lay deep within the arboreal maze, demanding a trek of at least 2 hours. As I crossed the threshold into the woods, the canopy seemed to knit itself together above, swallowing the meager moonlight. Time dissolved as I navigated the uneven terrain, the interplay of light and shadow conjuring phantoms at the periphery of my vision. More than once, illusory figures seemed to flit between trees, and disembodied whispers coiled around me, originating from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. At long last, I stood upon the spot marked in red. Initially, the scene offered nothing extraordinary, merely an intensification of the dense trees and tangled undergrowth. But then, sweeping the flashlight's beam in a slow arc, I caught the dull gleam of metal. Concealed behind a thicket of gorse was a hatch set flush with the earth, reminiscent of an antiquated storm cellar. My pulse surged. This had to be the locus, the nexus of the mystery. A moment's hesitation seized me, every primal instinct shrieking retreat. But the distance already traveled, the truths potentially lying just beyond, anchored me. Drawing a ragged breath, I grasped the cold metal handle and heaved. The hatch yielded with a gravelly protest, unveiling stone steps plunging into Stygian blackness. An exhalation of air rose to meet me, damp, redolent of decay, underscored by an indefinable scent, metallic and cloyingly sweet. I began the descent, my flashlight beam a fragile probe against the oppressive dark. With each step downward, that peculiar odor intensified, becoming almost suffocating. At the base of the stairs rested another door. Thin slivers of light bled from beneath it, accompanied by the indistinct murmur of voices. My hand, slick with nervous sweat, trembled as it reached for the handle. The tableau revealed upon opening that door is seared into my memory, a perpetual nightmare. A vast cavern unfolded, illuminated by the erratic dance of torchlight. At its heart stood a stone altar, its surface darkly stained. Encircling it, figures clad in robes, their faces obscured by deep hoods, swayed and chanted in a guttural tongue I could not place, their voices weaving a mesmeric, undulating rhythm. Yet it was the offering upon the altar that froze the blood in my veins. A human form, gender indeterminate, bound, struggling feebly against its restraints. As I watched, paralyzed by horror, one robed celebrant elevated a ceremonial knife, its polished blade catching the flickering light. A gasp must have escaped my lips, for in an instant, every hooded head swiveled towards me. Time seemed to suspend itself in that shared moment of discovery. Then, pandemonium erupted. The cultists surged forward, their incantations morphing into guttural cries of fury. I spun and fled, legs churning, scrambling frantically up the stone steps. Their pursuit echoed behind me, a cacophony on the unforgiven stone. Bursting from the subterranean prison into the moon-dappled forest, I ran without looking back. Branches lashed at my face. My lungs burned with each desperate inhalation. Directionless, propelled only by sheer terror, I plunged deeper into the woods. How long I ran remains a blur. It felt an eternity. Eventually, gasping, I stumbled through the tree line, finding myself miraculously on the familiar outskirts of Havenwood Hollow. My flight didn't cease until I collapsed through the sheriff's office door, a heap of raw nerves and exhaustion. What ensued was a maelstrom of official procedure. I stammered my harrowing account to the visibly stunned Sheriff Blackwood, who promptly summoned reinforcements. Within hours, federal agents had converged on the town, initiating a comprehensive sweep of Whisperwood. They located the subterranean chamber, but it stood desolate. The cultists had evaporated, taking with them all incriminating traces. Only the ominous stains upon the altar remained, a silent, grim testament to the horrors enacted there. In the subsequent days, recounting my ordeal repeatedly to various tiers of law enforcement, the chilling magnitude of my discovery settled upon me. The disappearances, the spectral sightings, all orchestrated by this hidden sect, their operational duration, the true tally of their victims, these questions might forever remain unanswered. My story ignited a national media firestorm. Reporter exposes ritualistic cult in Appalachian town, blared the headlines. A sense of professional triumph, of exoneration, should have followed. Instead, a profound, gnawing dread took root, because I harbored a secret withheld even from the authorities, a truth I scarcely dared acknowledge to myself. In those frenzied seconds within the cavern, as the hooded figures turned as one, I had registered a flicker of recognition, a fleeting glimpse, yet indelible. Beneath one concealing hood, I was certain I had seen the face of Sheriff Silas Blackwood. I departed Havenwood Hollow at the earliest opportunity, yet the place, the experience, refused to relinquish its hold. Sometimes, in the dead stillness of night, I fancy I hear chanting carried on the wind, perceive robed silhouettes lurking in the periphery. I dismiss it as trauma's echo, my mind playing tricks born of terror. But a deeper intuition whispers the chilling truth. The cult endures somewhere in the shadows, observing, waiting, and one day they may seek retribution. For I have glimpsed their forbidden rites, unearthed their secrets, and in doing so, perhaps irrevocably sealed my own fate. So, I continue to write, to investigate, because the pursuit of truth is the only bulwark I possess, and perhaps, just perhaps, by persistently dragging darkness into the light, I can maintain a precarious step ahead of the encroaching shadows that forever nip at my heels.